You gotta quit getting mad and throwing it.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I'd like to call this meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, July 9th, 2019. This is a study session of the Prescott City Council. Please call roll.
Mayor Mangarelli,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Orr,
Here.
Councilman Blair,
Yes.
Councilman Good,
Here.
Councilman Lamerson,
Here.
Councilwoman Scholl,
Here.
Councilman Sischka.
Here.
All are present.
Thank you. So we have water on the agenda today. And we do have public comment cards out if you'd like to grab a public comment card. If you'd like to speak and get it to the clerk, and you will have 3 minutes. And let's start with item 3A, please.
Presentation on groundwater recharge.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Council. This afternoon, we're going to talk a little bit about groundwater recharge and recovery. We'll have an overview of it, how it works, the guidelines that we're bound by, as well as achievements that we're making on the recharge side. So this is an exhibit that actually one of our own, Emma Gomez in utilities a couple years ago created for us. Kind of gives an overview of how recharge works in regards to the world. We have natural recharge from rainfall and streams within our world and country, and then we also have the supplemental from wastewater treatment and or surface water like we do here in the city. So this is a little example showing how water is recharging back into the aquifer. It's in the aquifer, then comes around to the far left side of the picture as far as water production, where we're actually pumping it out of the ground. So groundwater recharge. So we consider our recharge facility. The city operates the aquifer storage and recovery facility. So we call it storage and recovery due to permits that we have with Arizona Department of Water Resources. So we recharge both surface water as well as the treated effluent at this site. We have state permitting through ADQ as well as ADWR. And I should back up with all my acronyms. Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, we have permits with ADQ, and Arizona Department of Water Resources, ADWR. We have permitting through both for this facility. The facility both meets state and city water management efforts at maintaining long-term groundwater supplies by the use of this facility and the recharge that we achieve. A little background. Historically, communities' wastewater supplies have been used, treated, and reclaimed. Use at Antelope Hills Golf Course dating back to the 50s. There's been a couple different pipelines going out to Antelope Hills over the years. But yeah, the early one in the 50s. When the reclaimed supplies were available and not needed at the golf course, then we recharge those into the groundwater. 1987 is when the amount of treated effluent exceeded the need of the golf course. So then that's when the city expanded on the idea of the recharge facility and the pipeline that goes out to that. So since 1988, with the permitting that was garnered then through the recharge project permit with ADWR, since 1988, the city has been zero discharge, is what we label it as. So every drop of water that's been treated at the treatment plants either gets used on golf courses, some construction usage, or goes to the recharge facility. So a lot of other communities throughout the state, they release it into a waterway, and it goes away that way instead of staying here and being recharged. Today, Antelope Hills, Prescott Lakes, and Capitol Canyon golf courses all use treated reclaimed wastewater supplies for those. There is no pumped groundwater used on any of the golf course turf in the city. And then supplies beyond that then go to the recharge facility. So the city continues to operate that facility since '88. In '98, then the city expanded to the point of purchasing Watson and Willow Lake reservoirs from the Chino Valley Irrigation District, CVID. With that came the water rights. So from that, then that's where the city gathered the surface water recharge abilities as part of the acquisition of those two reservoirs. So with that, in '98, then the city was issued 2 water storage permits for both reclaimed as well as the surface water. And one is denoted as non-recoverable. So we have Proposition 400, which requires that any wastewater that's created on annexed parcels or land masses associated with Proposition 400, then they have to go into unrecoverable or non-recoverable permit. All of those volumes, for instance, Granite Dells Estates is one of the subdivisions that falls into the Proposition 400. So we meter all wastewater that leaves Granite Dells Estates, and we have to account for that separately, and then it goes into the non-recoverable permit. Where other recharge that's created from water here within the city or the older part of the city, that goes in the recoverable permit, and then we're able to account for that through our annual pumping. In 2009, then the city submitted and was approved for a modified permit allowing recharge up to 7,200 acre feet. That was initiated after we started seeing that the existing permits we had did not allow us to recharge the volumes that we had available to be able to recharge. So that happened in 2009. And then in 2013, we again, as part of the airport water reclamation facility expansion, we went forward again, did all of the engineering and design associated with the recharge facility, and submitted and were approved for up to 12,000 acre feet a year now. So through our, I mentioned that we have kind of our regulations are that as part of the acquisition of the reservoirs, then also came with that previous guidelines and or limitations. So on the surface water recharge, we're allowed to recharge up to 3,861.26 acre feet a year of surface water per year. That goes back, those limitations came with the purchase of the reservoirs. They were put into place through court stipulations and orders with the Chino Valley Irrigation District years before. And we still are required to abide by those requirements when we purchase those. And then that also, if we go up to the 12,000 acre feet, then that allows us as much as 8,138.74 acre feet of effluent annually. So over the years, since the city purchased the reservoirs, now we've embarked on several improvement projects on the infrastructure. On the left picture is the latest project just completed, the valve replacement on Watson Lake. That valve was leaking to some point when we acquired it in 1998, and then continued and was degrading over the years. So that was a really important project to get done in regards to it, as well as now we protect the loss of the water, because it was constantly 365 days a year losing water that then we wouldn't necessarily be able to account for. So that was one project there. And on the right side is a couple pictures of before and after of the diversion structure out by Old 89, Highway 89A, the old 89A. And it used to be a series of open ditches going down through the ranch land there, as well as old concrete pipe. And we did a project that also replaced all of that. When years ago, when we would turn it on and start sending water out there, it would take at least 8 hours for the water to get to the recharge facility. Now it'll get there in less than 3. So there was that much uptake and or loss in the channel between the 2 points. So this is a graph showing our yearly recharge, 2006 to 2018. And I believe there's a direct correlation between the CIP projects, like the pictures I just had up there that we've completed, as well as when you look on the right side of the graph from 2012, right in this time frame is when we did the pipeline, surface water recharge pipeline replacement, and now we've done the valves. So we are gradually increasing and getting better on the volumes that we're able to manage and recharge. So the best ever has been this 7,300 in 2017, and we are on track to be close to that, or maybe we can even exceed it this year. We'll see how the rest of the year goes with moisture, but we are going to be in that same realm for 2019. Okay, as I mentioned before, here's Proposition 400, the initiative for the unrecoverable water, and that is right out of the charter, describing that where any development over 250 acres then shall include a requirement that all effluent generated by the development in the annexed area be used for permanent recharge. 2018 recharge total. Combined surface water and effluent supplies were 3,130.51 acre feet for the year, and that's a direct correlation to our dry year and lack of water in the reservoirs for us to be able to send out there. We only had 877.4 acre feet from the surface water from the reservoirs, and then 2,253 on the effluent side. So, and then from that, right here, supplies recharged permanently, 71.01. So that is those volumes from like Granite Dells Estates that I said we had to account for separately. So infiltration rates, there's many different models for it. Like here, they're referring to a stream. So there's infiltration that happens in days. When we get rainfall on the surface, there's infiltration then that takes years, centuries, and they consider also millennia on there. So again, this is kind of natural recharge from a stream, and then a well over here on how it impacts it, where it draws it out in days, years, and will impact it over time. So this is one of the reports that goes into ADWR. This is the 2018 then, showing the 1,631.58 then that was recovered. So this is water that was recovered from those permits, from the recoverable permit, and then the associated wells on where it was attached. So 2019. So as of July 5th, so last Friday, we were at 2,638.69 acre feet of surface water already for the year. So we're only about 1,200 acre feet from our total allotment, that 3,861. And we've also had reclaimed water of 1,812.65 acre feet year to date. So that's a total of 4,451 acre feet year to date that's already been recharged between surface water and effluent. And in contrast, we have pumped 3,268 feet of water. So right now we're about 1,200 acre feet ahead with recharge. So we've recharged almost 1,200 acre feet more than we've pumped for the year. And the forecast for permanent recharge is about 130 acre feet for the year. With that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions you have. Yes, sir.
Never mind.
Yeah, Councilman.
You know, Craig, what people say is, well, okay, so you're putting this water back in the ground. Where does it go? And, you know, does it go back into the Little Chino Aquifer? Does it just kind of disperse from there? You know, I think that we need to give people a more definitive answer than, yes, we're recharging water, and yes, it's, from a legal standpoint, we're doing this, but from your best estimate, where does it go?
It's going back into the aquifers. What I can't say is that what kind of a time frame from our recharge facility, how long does it take to get from that recharge facility to the aquifer in Chino Valley where the majority of our water is being pumped from. Can't tell you if that's months, years, you know, if it's 5 years, 10 years, in there. Where we're recharging, we're in the upper aquifer out there in that area. The groundwater levels in that area are all in about the 200-foot range. And then it varies depending how much we're recharging. It varies depending whether Granite Creek is running right next to it. We'll see that bump up on our monitoring wells. If Granite Creek is flowing, we will see that rise in the monitoring wells that's closer to the creek there as well. So there's that natural recharge there also. Where we're pumping in Chino, we're down in the deeper aquifer in the, well, we have water out there too that we're in the 200-foot range, but we're down deeper also in the 400-foot range. Yeah, how long it takes to get from one place to the other, that I can't answer. But yes, it's going into those aquifers, and you know,
I think
going
people
through.
can't understand. They're saying, well, it's south of the Little Chino, so isn't it going to continue to flow south? But that's not necessarily the case, is it?
No, flows more north here. Yep.
Other questions, comments from the council? Public comment?
No, Mayor.
All right. Thank you so much, Craig. Appreciate it. Let's move on to item 3B, please.
Presentation of proposed water policy changes on water service outside of city limits.
Okay. Is that working? Not working? Well, we've got one. Do we have one? Okay. So, welcome to the third water policy study session. If you recall, we'd had a first session that involved just an overview. 2 weeks ago, we discussed an overview of just the policy changes. Today, we'll be discussing a subsection of that policy that just relates to serving water outside of city limits. The goal of serving water outside of city limits isn't to allow for huge new development in the county. It's more to capture the exempt wells and septic tanks that exist now. There's been a real proliferation in the Prescott AMA, those exempt wells, and if we make city water available, we can reap a lot of benefits from being those exempt wells and septic tanks within the city system. Before we get on to that, we do have a method for people to participate in this ongoing discussion. The first, of course, is to attend these study sessions. People that are here hearing that don't need to hear that again. We've also established a website that has videos of all of these policy study sessions, along with the presentations from our two experts, Mr. Woodard and Mr. Dishlip. And we're also accepting comments at water.policy@prescott-az.gov and through the standard mail at the address there on this slide. We'd love to have the public submit comments, ways we can make this policy better, things they like, things they don't. Those would be great. With regard to service outside of city limits, we see several benefits that we can reap from trying to get these exempt wells and septics under control. The first, of course, is to reduce the overall overdraft within our AMA. There's a couple different ways that this would work. First is that any new property connecting to the city's service would have to abide by all of the city's rules. Our conservation code, our landscaping code, it would have to connect to city sewer, so we'd get the recharge that's currently being lost. In addition to that, if you think of the total amount of water that can be withdrawn from the AMA, it's based upon all of the users. So the city has a set limit of what it can use. Prescott Valley has more or less a set limit of what it can use. And then there are thousands of exempt wells. We have no idea what they're using. Could be anything. The more of those wells that we can bring within the city's system, within the city's limit, cuts down the total amount of water that can be withdrawn from the AMA. Because now it's just an addition to that number. The second one, obviously, is to improve our water quality. All of those septic tanks don't necessarily have a positive effect on our creeks, our streams, and the aquifer itself. It's not treated effluent that's being released, it's just effluent. Third, we would like to increase the amount of recharge that we see within the city system. Of course, if you're on a septic tank, there is no recharge there, or at least very, very little. Along with that, we'd like to decrease the lost water. So water that's pumped out of the aquifer, sent out to people's homes, and is just gone forever. We'd like to see that bring back into that cycle of recharge and recovery.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Currently, the city does not provide water service outside of city limits unless there's a prior right. And many of the new development outside of city limits that is not within what we call a groundwater subdivision is serviced by either an exempt well or private hauling. It's important to note that a lot of the private hauling companies get water from Easy Street, which is a City of Prescott entity, and it's very cheap to get it there. So we are essentially serving water outside of city limits through these hauling companies, and if people haul their own water. So what is an exempt well? An exempt well is a well that pumps less than 35 gallons per minute. These wells are not subject to measurements or reporting requirements, as Clyde mentioned earlier. There is approximately 13,000 exempt wells within the Prescott Active Management area, and homes that are using these exempt wells are not required to go with the 100-year assured and adequate water supply requirements as the City of Prescott is to do so. Up here you'll see an infographic. You can see that 97% of the exempt wells in the Prescott Active Management area are exempt wells. Only 3% are municipal or water company wells like ours. Compared that to Arizona, that is a big increase. Usually there's more non-exempt wells for the municipal providers and big companies, and there's only about 79% of exempt wells if you look at Arizona as a whole.
Good afternoon. I'm here to briefly touch on some of the both existing and potential future costs associated with the septic tanks. Currently, as noted here, about 90% of the water that's discharged into a septic tank system is not going back into the aquifer. For me, the consideration that reigns supreme here is the impacts we have on local surface water quality, that being our 14 impaired waters, whether they be creeks or lakes. The EPA has estimated that 20 to 25% of all septic systems are either not performing adequately or were not designed and installed properly. That represents a significant cost to the city when it comes to downstream impacts to surface water quality. Now, the pollutants associated with septic tanks are those that are most directly impacting our creeks and lakes currently, that being E. coli for our creeks, nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and ammonia in our lakes. It was also noted in the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality's total maximum daily load for the lake, Watson Lake, when they were surveying around to identify sources of pollutants. Those areas immediately below areas of intensive septic use had the highest ratings of nutrients in the area. So there is a direct connection that ADEQ has recognized through this document. So regardless of the improvements we make within that water body, we're also going to have this other consistent source of nutrients coming down, not only to the creeks, but also to the lakes. And one last note here is that in those documents that really prescribe and describe the nature of the surface water pollutants, ADEQ specifically mentions, rather than treating the kind of results of this kind of pollutant, their goal and focus is to meet it at the source.
Okay, again, to reiterate some of the benefits then, reduce overdraft on the AMA by in lieu of creating new exempt wells, that there isn't any metering or any tracking of use on there. If it is on a metered service, then it's known. Improved water quality, as Matt was saying, by reducing the number of septic systems out there that have the potential of creating additional issues. Increase recharge by gathering that water in a sewer system and getting where we run, we see about 60% return on the water that's sent out versus there where they're estimating septic systems potentially in the 10% range. So there's potential of 50%, increase in water available to be recharged back, as well as then decrease lost water. If it's not just evaporating away, then that's more that can be recharged. So this is the area, I forget what we're calling it. The expansion area map that's being contemplated. This includes all water service area that the city currently has, water service agreement areas, the general plan area, as well as the Chino Valley Irrigation District that the city has responsibility for as well. So that's on the north side of the map. This is the proposed map to use for consideration of looking at serving outside of the city with that. So ultimately, from what we're calling the WRM, the Water Resources Model, that Herb Dishlip put together for the city for total build-out units or accounts in the city, estimated at about 45,966 accounts would be total number of water accounts in the city's utility system, and that would equal to about 12,732 acre-feet of water a year, where we're allowed just over 16,000. So we're still quite a bit under that. And again, this came from the WRM with utilizing all specific data for all of our existing accounts, and then looking at zoning for fill-in areas and or development, and applying that usage to those that we're already seeing on all the existing accounts.
Mayor, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Craig?
Yes.
Is this 45,966 accounts, looking at zoning and everything, is that for the entire service area?
That's correct. That includes all existing accounts now, as well as then new accounts. So total.
Question. I understand we have water available. My question would be, what kind of cost or outlay do we have to go to make sure that our facilities are updated enough to handle the expansion? In other words, we have a new sewer plant now that we're adding to. We have water production facilities. What would we have to do to be able to serve this maximum and recharge this maximum?
Over the years, as we've been doing the water and the wastewater models, we have been modeling the system to go to total build out.
Okay.
And actually, from the Dishlip and the Woodard reports, they're both coming back with that we will have less water use than what we were estimating. We were using the previous estimates in those models before, so we have this covered in those estimates and consideration for designing.
That's nice to hear. And the last part of that would be sitting on the general plan and understanding and looking out long-range planning. This is basically still the same map segments that we use in the general plan. Would that be correct?
That's correct. With the general plan doesn't include like the Chino Valley area, things like that, because the general plan is city specific. So that's the little variance to it.
And that's understandable, but I just want the public to know that this map has not just been generated for this presentation. It's a map that's been out there for many, many years.
That's correct.
Councilman Sishka?
Thanks, Mayor. I have a question for Michael. Michael, if this policy goes forward, can we demand that whoever we're watering lives up to our landscape standards?
You can, and I think you should. I think that if you're going to expand your service delivery area, everybody should play by the same set of rules.
We have additional information coming up
On
in
the next
future
slide.
on that too.
Craig, in the unincorporated north of 89A, what assumptions about zoning? What were the lot sizes you assumed?
The general plan has zoning
Yeah.
to that. I can't tell you
That's
specifically
okay.
right now, but it's in there.
Councilman Lamerson?
Thank you. Greg, you know, you keep referencing the general plan specific. And while I understand that the general plan also included areas outside of the city limits as our service area, that potential build out for the entire area that was contemplated in the general plan is not 45,000.
This is accounts. It would be utility
It
accounts.
wouldn't be 45,000 accounts either. I mean, at the end of the day, the 45,000 accounts means 45,000 units. The general plan contemplated areas coming into the city at some point in the future, which aren't necessarily accounts that we're accounting for today. They could be in the future with, for example, we're looking at annexations right now, and those annexations would be different, and the potential of those annexations would be different than what we're dealing with on today's projected consumption.
Councilman Lamerson, I can tell you that the currently forecasted annexations, we've already built into the model to see how it will affect us. So that is reflected in this number. Any future annexations, don't know. There is quite a bit of headroom at around 4,000 acre feet above that we're allowed to use. So we could accommodate those additional zoning changes as they come up in the future.
Thank you for bringing up the additional headroom. That's what I was referencing. Thank you.
Councilman Good?
Yeah, that was one of my questions of how can you legitimately project what your accounts are going to be when we don't know what type of future demand, annexation, development, et cetera, could possibly be in those areas. You know, there's been no mention of our plan to achieve safe yield, and I understand that the state doesn't really have any teeth in that requirement, but it's still legally designated as a goal that the AMA should be planning on reaching. So it comes down to what would the costs be to extend water to non-Prescott residents relative to the benefits that you're stating. How do you project that? This is a major change in policy. Extending water and sewer to 2-acre parcels that can be almost anywhere in that map area. And the benefits are improving water quality, reducing the overdraft, and increasing recharge is difficult to say that it's in the best interests of the residents of Prescott to have their tax dollars being spent in this manner unless there's some legitimate cost justification.
Okay, I don't believe that any of us on the review committee here considered that the city would be embarking into a project to go and extend out into those areas. It's going to be the matter of a project will come along and it's going to have to grow from the edges going out a little bit of time. A project would come along and be responsible then to take the water line out to the project. Not that the city would necessarily do that.
So you're saying the city wouldn't see any costs involved in extending infrastructure to these potential users?
Hold on to that thought if you don't mind. I'll go to the next slide, and we'll have a little more that will go closer to that. So this is some of the contemplations then that we are looking at for that. So for a new service, or a new service may be permitted within the expansion zone. For that new service to be considered, a feasibility study would be required. So the applicant would submit a feasibility study. So that would be on the realm of if the infrastructure is even capable of serving it. If the infrastructure is available, if you can get, flow away from it for wastewater, what it would take, for water, depending on elevations, because we have, so much elevation change here. Then on the commercial development side, then a cost-benefit analysis would need to be submitted to be reviewed for commercial development and subdivisions. So then that could be reviewed, and then ultimately they would go for council approval as well as like the water committee.
And Craig, as an addition, water provided outside the city limits has a 30% surcharge. Is that correct too?
That's correct.
So that would help offset whatever cost is plus the impact.
Councilman Larson?
Thank you. We're talking about negotiations possibly here of taking the assets, which would be the water portfolio of the city of Prescott, and talking about for whatever the purpose, whether it be aquifer protection, whether it be for recharge, et cetera, in the AMA, delivering water outside of the city limits of Prescott. Can we also set the terms and conditions? This is probably a question for John. Terms and conditions upon which we would extend that water with regards to outside the city limits, for example. They have to hook up so that the water would be returned back through the sewer system, et cetera?
Next slide, because there's your answer. The answer is yes. Just remember that this proposed policy is a permissive policy. It allows the city council ultimately, to enter into agreements to provide water service outside the city to unincorporated areas to achieve all those benefits. But as the prior slide discussed, there are some preliminary conditions that have to be met. Can the infrastructure handle it? Can the proposed developer afford to pay for the infrastructure, as Craig was talking about? What's the benefit to the city? Not just the benefits that were discussed, the four, sort of water quality, water supply benefits, but are there other economic benefits? Is it going to generate some economic development? Is it going to generate jobs, perhaps, if it's a commercial enterprise? Those kinds of things. So that would be something that would play into your decision-making matrix. It's whether or not to agree to provide water outside the city. And then if there was an agreement or decision to provide the water, these would be the minimum requirements: the sewer tie-in, making sure infrastructure was available on the slide. They'd have to meet all of the applicable city codes, including payment of impact fees, conservation code, landscaping code, and we would have by agreement and enforceability. If somebody were to go in and plant plants that weren't on the pallet, we would have by agreement with the property, as part of like a deed restriction, be able to go in and make them remove. Also, remember, we have a graduated, in addition to the 30%, we have a graduated fee structure. So if you use a lot of water, you're going to pay more per gallon as you use it. Whereas currently, if somebody has a well, they can water alfalfa all day long and not pay anything for it other than the electric to run the pump. So there's that sort of fiscal or financial burden on someone. So and then, of course, as was referred, the abandonment of wells and septic tanks, preventing new wells from going in. And then, so these would be the minimum requirements. And then in addition to any other discussion or any other agreement, if it's particular to the project, you could come up with other terms and conditions that would then consummate a deal.
Carry on.
All right, so I think most of this slide's been covered already. Thank you very much. One thing that's not mentioned is in regard to the cost-benefit analysis for commercial and subdivision development. We'll require that to see what kind of, obviously, cost and benefit there is to the city. Along with that, we will charge those commercial developments, the subdivisions, the cost of acquiring the water in the first place. Based on Gary Woodard's analysis, the current market rate is somewhere between $25,000 and $40,000 per acre foot. Based on that cost-benefit analysis, it will be up to you, the council, to decide what we should charge that development.
I have a question with regards to commercial.
Sure.
Thank you. If it's adjacent to the city, can we require them to, in order to have the water outside the city limits, can we require them to come into the city so we can collect the sales tax and the bed tax to help pay for the police and fire protection that is associated with being in the city as not out with as compared to being outside of the city? For example, in order to take the water from the portfolio of the city, your commercial enterprise, to our benefit, would be able to collect the revenue that's necessary to provide that water.
Yes, we absolutely can. Several other municipalities, Phoenix, Tucson, have similar requirements in their agreements to serve water outside of their city limits as well.
Thank you for answering that question that way so people in the public understand. Yes, if indeed you want the city's water to provide to you the opportunity to develop your commercial property outside of the city limits, we can require you to come in the city to get that water.
Right.
Just a caveat, though, it would have to meet the requirements, as you said in your introduction. It'd have to be adjacent to the city. So if it were, let's say, adjacent to Chino Valley and somebody wanted to do some commercial, we couldn't require the annexation, but you would still have the opportunity to analyze it for all the cost benefits to the, say, the region as a whole, whether or not you were going to agree to provide the water. So it would have to meet the minimum requirements for any kind of annexation.
Thank you for that clarification, John.
Now, Councilman Good, with regard to your question about what's the benefit to the city of this policy, there's really very little benefit to the city. The benefit is to the AMA as a whole. The cost to the city, we're going to try to break even on this, but really this is part of our overall review of our policies and codes, that we're trying to do what we can for the AMA as well. We looked at a lot.
Well, you know, that's the problem with the AMA and the Arizona Department of Water Resources requiring a safe yield achievement within the AMA, and we've got all these different entities that impact it with nobody working together and no strategic plan. Clearly, this should help. If we had a static number of accounts, we would be improving our ability to contribute to that safe yield. But at the same time, it may be creating a acceleration of growth, which would be a negative impact on safe yield. So it's difficult to say that this would be a beneficial policy in the long run.
Councilman Good, we're one entity in the AMA. We're doing our part. We intend to be a leader in the AMA on conservation measures, as we have been in the past. And this is one small step we can take to continue in that vein.
Well, it seems to me that if we were to adopt this and provide water to properties in the county that are restricted in density, then we may be able to support my hopes to have some modest growth and not high density, high congestion, negative traffic impacts, etc., on high density growth. So from that perspective, it might be beneficial overall.
Yes, sir. And ultimately, any application for water service outside of the city limits will come before this council. You'll have an opportunity to make those comments and review it and determine if it's in the best interest of the city and the AMA.
There's also, Councilman Good, as the additional benefit is whatever recharge is directly recharged and not used for further development furthers the concept of taking the recharge allocation and helping with the hope and expectation of reaching safe yield.
Well, wouldn't we have to decide in some policy on how much of that recovery does go to safe yield?
That would be something that would be up to you guys to decide.
I think it's important to remember this is not just an automatic that anybody that wants to hook up to city water in the county can do that. It just gives us the opportunity to review each one. And I think this is a good process to do that. I'm excited for the fact that this does allow us to help manage more of the AMA if we choose, if the council at the time chooses to bring in service water outside of our city limits, then you can help monitor that and you get the recharge. Whereas right now you've got wells going in all the time in the county, and they're going into septics, and we know that they don't recharge; they evaporate. So I think it gives us a lot of latitude. I think the other thing to consider, was mentioned the 30% increase in the water fee, and that's going to, I think, more than cover. We know the cost of that maintenance of that infrastructure, and then that's really going to subsidize the rest of our aging system in the city. Finally, this gives us the opportunity with future development moving forward. This is a great bargaining chip for us to have the opportunity to water up certain areas of the county, which could be beneficial in some sort of deal moving forward. Councilman Blair?
Yeah, I think looking back in history of when we first purchased Watson Willow Lake and the start of the water committee, we've done a lot of things in the past years: conservation, tiered water system, recharge capabilities. All that stuff put together is exactly where we're at today and why we're looking at this again. I think we've done a good job, an excellent job of taking care of our water resources. And I think without a doubt, when you start talking about Ron James and the James family having water on their properties outside the city limits, being able to look at each one of these policies and each one of these projects individually, like we did with Saddlewood, and require them to have a bucket underneath their drain system so they could use the water off their roof and do some creative things. It doesn't preclude us from doing that, and I think it makes a difference. So I think every time we can talk about putting something on a municipal system instead of using septic and wells, it makes sense. So I would like to know before the next meeting on a list, Mr. Manager, and we always talk about the warm and fuzzies, but I would like to know if you see any downside to doing this whatsoever.
Councilman Sischka?
Yeah, I think other than the benefit to the AMA, which is absolutely straightforward, we don't have to provide police and fire out to those areas. They're not in the city. We don't have to provide maintenance on the roads because they're not in the city. It's an excellent way to make sure that we are water healthy and financially healthy here at the city.
Mm-hmm. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, I would like to echo some of what the mayor said. For me, I like we're being proactive on this, and the city's taking leadership, and I think we can set an example. We've set an example, but here we can actually physically do some things that we've been talking about. I like the measuring. When you have an exempt well, we have no idea how much water is coming out of the aquifer. Here we're going to measure. We're going to know. We'll know what's going back in. So I really, as long as it pays for itself, and I think it will, because they would put in all the infrastructure, right, Clyde?
That's correct.
Yes. And so would be maintaining it. But again, that 30% surcharge is a big piece of this as well. So I like it, and I appreciate the work you've done on it.
Thank you. Public comment?
Not quite there.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's a process for those outside applicants to get the water.
Right.
They would have to submit an application, including that feasibility study, to show that it's even possible at the outset, so we don't waste a lot of time, so
Right.
they don't waste a lot of time. For commercial and subdivision projects, they'd have to submit a cost-benefit analysis. The council would at some point come up with the cost of water for that project. The Water Issues Subcommittee, which has been so important in the past, will still be a large part of this. We'll review each project, make a recommendation, which then would have to be brought up for approval by the entire council. 2 weeks, we'll be talking about other code changes. That's a little vague. Generally, it will include our landscaping changes, some conservation code changes, a few other, not necessarily minor things, but things that may not warrant an entire study session. Now I'm done.
Great. Thank you, guys. Good presentation. Public comment?
Leslie Hoy?
Oops. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. some of this sounds good, but there's a lot of alarm bells going off for me, because I can't really see why we would be doing this instead of annexing. And the only reason I can think of that we would be doing this instead of annexing is something that wasn't mentioned in this presentation, which is, will there be water credits coming from the effluent that can be used for further building? As a member of the the committee that passed the Prop 400 initiative, also known as the Reasonable Growth Initiative, I'd like to remind you what's in the city charter. In Section 4, Declaration of Policy, the people of the city of Prescott believe it is in the best interest of the city to establish additional local requirements for annexation to ensure that any future expansion of the city's boundary does not undermine the city's efforts to attain safe yield or otherwise threaten the water supply of city residents. So I think it would be, if you're going to pass this policy, we need to know, is the water going to be used for further growth rather than going to safe yield? And if it is, well, so it needs to be justified that in 2005, I believe that Prop 400 passed by a 2-to-1 margin. My second concern, and I just want to say that I'm not here to criticize, I'm here because I really love this special place that we live in. It worries me that we don't have an overall vision. The general plan is not adequate. I've lived here for 20 years. I've been through 2 general planning processes when citizens worked really hard, and then at the last minute, what they designed for the general plan was not what happened. And as we see builders come forth with amendments all the time, and they're almost always approved, I think that we need a vision for our community that the whole community is involved in, to see what do we want to look like 30 years from now, 50 years from now. If we're just going to turn into a metropolis like Scottsdale that people are fleeing, or California, another beautiful place that got wrecked, and people are coming here because they don't want to live in California, what have we really done? And I think we can grow without that happening, but we need to have proper planning. So I guess the 2 things I would like to hear from the council are the effluent credits going to be used for further growth from outside the community? And is that bypassing the Prop 400 process passed by the citizens? And then the other thing I'd like to know is, other than a general plan, what is the vision for our community? Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
Howard Mechanic.
Mr. Mayor and Council, I think this is a good proposal, but I have one suggestion. And there's been discussions about safe yield, and I discussed that a couple weeks ago. Other people have mentioned that. People are asking to allocate some of this to permanent recharge. Prescott is the only community, and I agree with Council, that we've taken steps, unilateral steps, that we have paid money through Proposition 400. The citizens are sacrificing a valuable resource and putting it in the ground to help the whole AMA, not Prescott. We're helping the whole AMA. And I think it's time for unilateral actions to end. I don't think we should allocate any of this water to permanent recharge. Now that may be surprising, but here's the hitch. As I mentioned, we need to get all the parties together to develop a safe yield plan. And we have a big card in our deck right now, in our hand. We have a lot of water we don't need. Let's say we take 5,000 acre feet out of this 10,000. And we go into meeting with all the jurisdictions in the AMA. And we say, we're willing to work with you to allocate this 5,000 acre feet to safe yield, but you have to share the cost. If they're willing to do that, we're on our way to develop a safe yield plan. And ask them, as part of this 5,000 acre feet, let's get a plan to do the whole thing. This is a card we have in our hand, and this is the last time we have a good chance to reach safe yield. If the other parties, and if it say no, we don't want to share in that cost of the 5,000 acre feet, I'm willing to say I'm not willing to unilaterally pay to keep water in the ground so Chino Valley and the exempt wells and Prescott Valley can pump that water that I just paid to leave in the ground. It will be in the ground a little longer if we leave it in there, but their intention is to take it out. I've worked on 2 government safe yield committees, and I've also been vice chair of the city's conservation and safe yield committee. So I do have a little background. I've worked a lot on this issue. This is our last good chance. And I'm willing to say unilateral actions are over. We need an action here, and I'm asking the city, as I did 2 weeks ago, please invite all the parties to get together, and we're making an offer to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mechanic.
Ralph Hess.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I have just some questions. I don't have the knowledge that both Howard and Leslie do with regard to these water issues. Recently, I attended one of the campaign events for those who are seeking re-election, and one of the things that Ms. Orr had provided at one of the sessions was this 2018 annual water withdrawal and use report summary. One of the graphs was displayed today, which shows what the total recharge has been over the last 13 years. And today we heard a projection for 2019. The one thing that stuck out to me is that over those, well, now 14 years if you include the projection, only 2 of those years are we projected or have recharged more water than we have pumped. And in fact, the 2018, which I guess was not a banner year, the total water pumped was 6,763.75 acre feet, and the total recharge was 3,172.91 acre feet. So over those 14 years, we're not recharging what we're pumping out. In fact, it's closer to half, it looks like to me. And so along the lines of what Leslie and Howard was referencing with regard to safe yield, my question is, will this policy that you're considering today really address the overall issue of safe yield if we only do things in a piecemeal fashion? If we do not have people coming together, all of those who were within the AMA, if we don't have all of those folks coming together to work out a plan comprehensively rather than do a piecemeal, are we really going to be getting to safe yield? So the first question I have is, do you have a plan to work with the other jurisdictions to develop a plan to reach safe yield as we are required to do? That's one question I have. The other question I have relates to something I just heard today, which was the fact that the septic systems are apparently polluting our water source. And one of the reasons that you're considering this policy is to remedy that. And my question is, have you considered any other alternatives to bar those who are owners of septic tanks or septic systems that are polluting our water source, other than exchanging their septic systems for us providing a sewer system? So is there something we can do proactively, or have you considered anything we can do proactively to prevent them from continuing to pollute our water source.
Thank you, Mr. Hess.
So I'll just wait for the answers to those questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other public comment?
No, Mayor.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the council? All right. Well, thank you guys for that presentation, and this meeting is adjourned.